Hi, welcome everyone. Come on in. We're excited to have you here today. Been looking forward to having this conversation with you. Before we get started, I just want to invite you to take a big deep breath in and out. And if at all possible, to do three things for me. Number one is to be present. Give yourself this time to just be present for yourself. Rarely do we get an opportunity, or that we give ourselves the opportunity to just pause, turn away the phone, turn off all the notifications, and just be present in this moment. Number two is to be open. Today, you may hear some things that are brand new to you. There may be some things that you've always heard and always known. And so today, what I'm going to invite you to do is just to be open to learning something new or affirming something that you already know and agreeing to implement it in your life today. And then thirdly is to be engaged. Now, if you are with me online, we will engage through the chat feature. And at the end, give you an opportunity to ask questions. That part will not be recorded. If you are watching the replay, the way that you can be engaged, even in the virtual setting, is maybe have a journal close by or just a simple piece of paper. If writing for you is not something that you do or enjoy or is not accessible to you, then you may want to consider re-listening to this recording several times. Perhaps it's, having a document ready on your phone to take notes, whatever is available and right for you to make sure that you stay engaged with the content that I'm going to share today. So we can get started in just a few moments. I'm going to turn my camera off for just a few more minutes longer. Listen to the music as I'm listening to it and just take some deep breaths in and out to bring back to your energy level to a present state of mind. So what I'm going to encourage you to do when I turn off my camera for just a few more moments is to take a deep breath in, feel all that breath in your belly, and then release it. So it'll look something like this. And just do that 3 times in your own time. So go ahead and turn off my camera for the moment, and then I'll come right back. But I'm going to be breathing with you. So that should be your first breath. Let's take a second breath in and out. Take another deep breath in and out. And just be aware of how your body feels in this moment. Name what emotions you might be feeling. Perhaps you're feeling those emotions somewhere in your body. If you have other things that are playing around in your mind, that's okay too. And one more for good measure, take another deep breath in and out. Now, if you like that playlist, Spotify has some really great playlists. That one specifically is called Stress Relief. It has some really good soothing tones. If you enjoy music and if music and sound really help elevate or regulate your emotions, the stress relief Spotify playlist is a really good one. I have several other ones that I play. So if you would like some suggestions on that, make sure that either you put in the chat or send me an email at the end of this session today, and I'll be happy to share with you what has worked for me and for my clients along the way. So welcome to today's session of Leading While Grieving. This is going to be a free monthly masterclass series that I'm going to be doing every month for the next 6 months through to the midsummer of 2023. I can't believe we're almost at that point. And so we are in December of 2023 at this recording. In today's topic, we're going to be talking about holiday grieving and leading. And for many of us who have been in some kind of leadership role, now this could be a manager, a supervisor, a business owner, maybe you're someone that leads initiatives or community initiatives, or you're a community advocate. Maybe you are a leader in your own home. Having a leader title isn't necessarily associated with a corporate title. There's lots of ways that we are leaders within our life, in the community, in the companies and businesses that we work in, and in our families and friends. And so the holidays are a particularly challenging time for a lot of people without even with the sense of loss. But when you add on significant loss, like the death of a loved one, like a sibling or a parent or a friend, maybe the loss of your dog or cat or what animal or pet that you have. This could also be the loss of a job or loss of a relationship. It could even mean during the holidays you've had to move. So grief and loss shows up in a lot of different ways. We are going to focus some of this material a little more towards people who have experienced death in the last 5 years, but all of the concepts that we'll be talking about today, regardless of the timing of the loss or what that loss is, will help you no matter what. So many of you that are here today know me through my previous business of Malone Consultants Group, which is still live and going, don't worry. But recently, over the last 6 months, I started a brand new company called Mysteria. And through that, I decided to, and I'll share a little bit more about my story as to why I'm doing this anyways, but I am a grief educator and a coach. I'm also an end of life, or what is also called a death doula, where I really get to help families and their loved ones go through the death journey with love, peace, and peace of mind, so they can be fully present with each other and with the loved one. Additionally, I'm an executive and leadership coach with 20 plus years of human resources experience, and I have seen grief and loss over and over with that 20 years of experience. So it's still very relevant in the work that I've done over the last 20 years, and now starting to really incorporate this idea of leaders experiencing grief and still having to function in the world. And so our time together today is going to be focused on what is grief and loss. What are some of those practical techniques for loss and the practices to navigate through holiday grief? Now, along the way, I want to share with you a personal story to really invite you in as to why this is such an important topic to talk about. Number one, grief and death and loss is not something that we do very well or at all. And when it comes to expressing our emotions and talking about these things in the United States in particular, but I know multiple cultures, multiple family dynamics, multiple countries, we just don't do death well. And it is something that every single person is going to experience in their life. And the more that I had to get into this myself, the more I realized that talking about these things weren't quite as scary as we make it out to be. Now, it's not, it's never a favorite thing that people want to talk about, although there's some. But having entered into a profession where death is the main topic, loss is the main topic, grief is the main topic, I have discovered a love for it. Now, like many of you, starting in 2020 till present day, we have dealt as a society with huge grief and loss. Some of that came through the COVID pandemic. We lost a lot of lives through that. We have also seen in our political environment and social justice environment of seeing and witnessing the death of ideas, the death of people, and the death of certain dynamics that hadn't ever been uncovered before or elevated and amplified in the media, in our conversations, and we've experienced great loss and grief through that as well. In addition to all of that, then we have our everyday losses that we all experience as human beings. In July of 2020, my dad passed away. I was his main medical advocate, caretaker, champion for all things in his mental health and wellness, as well as his physical health and wellness as well. When I came and moved back to the area that I live in, to take the main reason was to come and help take care of my dad. In July of 2020, he died, and he died alone. And no one had taught me any of these things other than just some of the self-help stuff that I had normally sought out for, because I'm an eternal and perpetual education seeker and knowledge seeker. And I realized that I knew nothing. And the more that I talked about like all the journey that I went through to be my dad's medical advocate, his healthcare advocate, his mental health advocate, his person advocate, and then I had to figure out his legacy information, like his will, the funeral, how did he want to be buried? What do I need to tell the doctors? Who needs to be there? Who doesn't need to be there? I didn't know any of this stuff. And there's so much information that it's almost overwhelming. And so today I want to talk about to kind of release some of the anxiety that we have around these things, but also to give you practical tools as we walk away with things that you can for yourself navigate your grief, or if there's someone around you that you suspect or have been told that they are experiencing grief and loss, to be able to share this information with them as well. So I wanted to start out with two quotes. The first quote being by David Kessler. David Kessler is a teacher of mine. I went through his grief educator certification class. He is someone that has co-written a ton of books, as well as written a ton of books around grief. He's written, he was a student and co-wrote books with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, which many people recognize as the person who created the 5 stages of grief. He has worked with Louise Hay and many, many other people. He's an incredible podcast as well. But I really found that this quote was pretty profound when we're talking about grief and loss during the holidays. There are happy holidays for some, but not happy holidays for all. And so if this is something that you can resonate with, put a 1 in the chat for me. If you're watching the replay, just make a note for yourself that this is something that resonates with you. The second quote is this by Alan Wolfett, who is also an early author and an early adapter. When people were not talking about death and grief and loss, he and Elizabeth Kubler-Ross were kind of pioneers in this space. But his quote that I thought was really profound when I read it during the time of my dad's death: when someone loved dies, the holidays can be very painful. The heart of the holidays has been torn apart. And so my dad died in July. His birthday was in August, and then we had the first holidays. And I'll tell you, those 6 months were such a blur that I didn't even know that it was the holidays. It wasn't until year 1 that I started to notice, oh, I've got this huge weight on me. I'm not sure if I'm ready to celebrate the holidays. And this is year 2, and I still feel that heaviness. I share that with you because I want to tell you that grief is transformative. Your grief is the response to loss. Your grief is the evidence of your love, whether it was the love of a human being or a pet, the love of a job. Maybe it was even just the love of the routine if you didn't love the job, or where you had energy spent to have purpose. Maybe you loved portions of your home that you've been displaced. Grief is transformative, and it is evidence of your love of something and somewhere, of someone. Grief also is transformative with your mental state, your physical state, your emotional state, even your spiritual state. For me, It was such a blur. And what I've come to understand about grief is that it also changes parts of our brain. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. It's called grief brain, and it changes the way that you make decisions. It changes the way that you interact with people. It changes the way that you have energy to do anything or motivation to do anything. And so there is true power behind grief. And oftentimes when we ignore that grief, it comes back up and rears itself like a baby that wants to be paid attention to. Now, you heard me talk about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who has the 5 stages of grief. It was never her intention that it was phases that we or phases or stages that we moved through on a linear stage. It just kind of happened that way because that's how our brains like to work, is linear. However, there's just no timeline to grief. As you can see here, there's at least 4 buckets of time that grief falls into, and it can happen at any time. But this just kind of gives you a little bit of an overview of how, when someone says, it's been 2 years, why aren't you over it? You can see here in this example that we experience 4 timelines of grief. The first one is that anticipatory. So when the doctors told me and my dad he did not have long to live because of the cancer and the other physical ailments that he had, and then he was also on suicide watch as well. And so we knew that his time on earth was not going to be as long as we would want. So we knew death was coming, and we when we started that grieving process. So it's the grief prior that happens prior to the death. The grief that happens when I think about the next holiday coming up, I'm anticipating the grief I'm going to feel. The second one is that acute grief, and it's when the death happens or when the loss happens. We experience it in that moment. And that could also include 3 years from now, and I see it and feel it, or something kind of activates my memory. Maybe it's a smell or a phrase, or maybe I see somebody walking by that looks like my dad, which, by the way, that has happened multiple times. That is acute. Then there's the early grief, and that is at least the first 2 years from that grief, because that first year is hard and kind of whirls by. Then the second year that it starts to hit, it really starts to hit people. And usually for a lot of people experiencing grief, that 2 to 5 years, that 2 to 5 year time frame is when people really feel that grief heavily. And then you have the mature grief. This is grief that is really for the rest of your life. Now, when I say grief is going to be with you for the rest of your life, this is not like a sentence to feel bad about. Grief is evidence of your love. Now, you may not every day think about your loved one or every day feel that loss. You may experience some happiness, but that grief will still be there. A client of mine lost a son over 20 years ago. And when the death anniversary comes up, he thinks, my son would have been 21 years old. Or when a significant event happens, so his son actually died a little bit before September 11th, and so, or 9/11. And so every time 9/11 comes, he thinks of the anniversary date again, because it was such impactful collective grief while he was grieving his son. And so know that these are kind of the timelines to grief. But as I mentioned, there are phases of grief, but it is not linear. And I can see on the screen here that my acceptance looks a little funny, but that's okay. We'll accept it. So the first 5, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, are the phases of grief that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross mentions, and most people know about it. But David Kessler added on to her 5 phases with her approval of meaning. We go through denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance over and over and over again. Well, in one moment, we'll be feeling anger for a long period of time, but it is just a mask of grief. And then we go, okay, we can accept it in the moment. But the meaning comes from when we can find meaning in the death, meaning in the loss, meaning in our grief. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like too. But often we think that grief is this clear line, or this where you can kind of see the stages of grief. Like we kind of go through, we think we go through, and this is how we make people feel and have the expectation of ourselves and of others to go through these significant stages. But the reality, as you can see here, is that it squiggles all around. And if you've experienced any grief at all, I can feel a lot of you head nodding. So if this resonates with you, put a 1 in the chat. Maybe for those of you that are watching the replay, make a note of like, my reality of grief is not linear and it does not follow a straight line. It is a squiggly, crazy, moving all around kind of experience. That is the reality of grief. So grief is already really challenging. And why is it more difficult during the holidays? Well, number one, our friends and family are gathering around, and you hear songs, be of good cheer, and we give gifts, and there's this expectation to feel really happy and joyful. And when you're in the midst of grief, it just doesn't happen. You may feel moments of it, and maybe later, a few years down the road, you'll have bigger moments of that joy and happiness. But just know that it is absolutely and 100% normal to experience grief while the holidays, and that it gets amplified during the holidays, even though maybe in your head and heart are like, why can't I just feel that Christmas joy, or whatever holiday you celebrate, that holiday joy or reflection. I don't even have the energy to do that. Also, during the holidays, starting in October through mid-January, there's lots of strong traditions and memories that happen, and these activate our grief as well. Because I know for me, my dad loved to go decorate the Christmas tree with candy canes, and I cannot bring myself to do it yet because it has such a strong emotional, I can feel it now, emotional tie to the holidays and that tradition. And then also, as I just mentioned, I can feel it, like grief during the holidays is a visceral reaction for most people. I feel it in my neck, in my pit of my stomach. I sometimes get a backache. It can also create like a little bit of vision blindness, or temporary vision blindness, or dizziness, or headaches. Maybe your shoulders ache. Just be aware of how your body feels, and know that maybe that shoulder ache has to do with grief more than quote unquote work stress. And the key thing to remember in our grieving process is that everybody's struggle with grief is different. And I wish I would have known this, because I had experienced not too well, it's about 6 months prior to my dad's death. I had a friend that died by suicide, and that grief was horrid and it was hard. And I expected that grief to feel the same way when my dog died, which died 3 months prior to my dad dying. And then the death of my dog still gets me even to this day. And of course, the death of my dad still gets me to this day. But my relationship with each one of them was very different. Where I was at in my life and my thinking, my busyness, the things that were going on in my life, they were all very different. And so to expect that I'm going to feel the same grief as I did with my friend who died by suicide, as my pet who died of cancer, and my dad who died of multiple things, like my grief was very different. And I wish I would have known that, because I thought there was something wrong with me. And people tend to think, well, it was just a dog, you should get over it, or it's been 2 years and you should get over it. There's no getting over the loss of love. So let's talk about, how do we even navigate our grief through the holidays? So this first part is kind of more general for anyone to navigate through the holiday season and your grief. And again, I mentioned that a lot of this upcoming content is going to be a little bit more focused on the death of a loved one, but this can apply to most grief that you would be experiencing through the holidays. The first one is to prepare yourself. And I know for some people that may feel a little counterintuitive, like I don't even have the energy to do it, but preparing yourself actually gives you the freedom to feel more energy. It gives you the opportunity to have more of an open heart. When you prepare yourself, you're going to know that you for sure are probably going to feel activated during the holidays. One, I mentioned I can't do candy canes yet, so I am prepared not to have candy canes. But when I go to family members that do the candy canes on the Christmas tree, I know this and I'm going to prepare myself. So that means I've got to practice self-care in small ways. And we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like in just a moment. It means making sure that I have my support people around me. It also means that I'm going to take an opportunity during the holidays to have a ritual or some kind of honoring or some kind of ceremony that acknowledges the grief that I'm experiencing, as well remembering my loved one. One of our local hospice centers here called Circle of Life does Lights to Remember, and it's a few days before the Christmas Eve holiday tradition. And what they do is anybody who has lost a loved one and has been a patient of hospice, they come and light a candle for them. You can do this in your home too. Or for some, it's doing a toast at the holiday meal, or a moment of silence, or even just having like a picture of your loved one, or something that reminds you of happy times at your job or at your house or whatever it was, just some symbol of happiness, of a good memory that you can honor during this time. So preparing yourself that you may feel activated instead of thinking that you won't. The next is to let yourself say no, and that no is a complete sentence. If you feel overwhelmed, it's okay to say no. You don't have to cook all the things. You don't have to host anything. You can say no, and you know what? Your people are going to understand. The next is, let's say, okay, I've decided I'm going to go to a holiday party. You know, my company does a holiday party. My friends or family, they're going to have a get together. I've decided I'm going to go, and I'm going to give myself permission to say that it is okay to leave early, because you may feel up to, or you may feel obligated to go, and that's okay. But you also need to realize that you can say, I'm not okay being here, and you can leave. You now have the permission, if you needed it, I'm giving you the permission to go home early and just say, I'm going to be here for 10 minutes and then I'm going to go. Or in your mind, I'm going to be here for 10 minutes and then I'll tell everybody I love them and I'm going to go. It's okay to leave early. And in fact, before you do this in the preparation status phase, is to have an exit strategy. So if you're going to a holiday party and you know that you're going to experience grief, or you're feeling some grief now, choose to either drive by yourself or take an Uber, or know that if you're riding with another person, that you have an agreement before you leave the house that you have an exit strategy to leave early. And so one of the ways that you can do is, let's say you and your partner are going to a holiday party. Before you leave the house, you have kind of a code word that says, I'm ready to go. Or you can just be straightforward like me and tell my husband, we're going. I don't feel like I'm done. My energy is, I can't take anymore. It's not because I don't love anybody, or that, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be here because I can't handle any more of it. Know that you are allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to change your mind if you feel overcommitted, overwhelmed, or dread. Just be honest with how you feel and know that it's okay. It's okay to feel happy at moments, and it's okay to feel sad in moments. Holidays take a lot of energy, and a lot of it is hard. So give yourself the knowingness and the permission and the self-love that it is okay to feel sad, and it is okay to be happy. It's okay to get better too. It doesn't mean that you're over the loss of your loved one. Now, for those of you that are in leadership roles, just kind of an added on, especially if you still have to go to work through all this. I know for me, running a business, running these initiatives, managing teams and multiple organizations where I was managing teams of projects after the loss of my dad was so difficult. And I finally had to let go of perfection. Now, as a high performer, high potential, high achiever person, letting go of perfection was very difficult for me. It is crucial to let go of the idea that you have to be perfect and stay on top of everything. Practice self-compassion and remember that grief requires taking care of yourself and recognizing your limitations when you cope with loss. Embrace delegation. Now, this is a really good time to remember that as a leader, part of your role is to delegate. Use this time to allow members on your team, members of your family, maybe your kiddos, to give them an opportunity to step up and support you. Have those people explore new responsibilities and even cross-train in different roles. Part of building a healthy, supportive culture at work is helping each other during times of need. And it is okay to say, hey, I need some extra support for a period of time. Now, if delegation is not your strong suit, and for many leaders, it is an area where they're challenged. If this is an area that you need additional support in, either write in the chat, that's me, or send me an email, that's me, and I have some free resources to provide you on how to do delegation. As a leader, also be thinking about, I'm going to reach out sooner rather than later. If you find yourself that you're unable to manage certain components of your role, reach out to your manager sooner rather than later. Reach out to your team sooner rather than later. Let them know that what you're experiencing and what you think you can and can't handle for a period of time. Consider solutions like maybe you need a little more flexible work schedule, or maybe taking a longer lunch for 3 days a week, or just different working hours that'll help support you. Because what's going to be most important is that you practice small moments of self-care. And things like this will be, eating nutritional or nourishing foods, getting enough sleep, making sure that you get enough sleep. Most women in particular who go through crisis forget to sleep, forget to drink, forget to eat. Those are the first three things, and that is what actually propels other health issues, both physical and mental for women, is because we forget to eat, forget to sleep, and forget to hydrate. And if you don't do anything else for self-care than those three, you're on the right track. Other things that you can do for small moments of self-care is journaling, walking, exercising, doing the Pomodoro method, and that's Pomodoro. It's called the Pomodoro method for working and attention. You set a timer. Essentially, it's basically you set a timer for like 10 minutes. The timer goes off for another 5 minutes for you to step away from your desk, from your whatever you're doing, and take a break, and then come back for another 10 minutes, then take 5-minute break. In grief, our attention span gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Our ability to focus gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And that Pomodoro effect is such a game changer. You may find that you'll want to keep that long term. And then, of course, doing breath work. There's a really great exercise. If you just look up the blue dot or the 4-box breath exercise on YouTube, you will find 2 really easy breath work things, exercises that you can do in 5 minutes or less, and nobody even needs to know that you're doing it. So practicing small moments of self-care, you can do the big self-care things, but I find that these small moments are really transformational and the ones that matter most. Most important thing I want you to know right now is that you are not alone. And I'm going to be sending everyone that attends this call live or on the replay some additional resources to consider. The first is there's a really amazing resource called grief.com. This is led by David Kessler. I'm actually a volunteer for them as well for their Tender Hearts, which meets different times during the week. They have an exceptional hour-long interactive, if you want, support group on the different types of grief, and then just grief in general. It is a monthly subscription, so I will let you know that, but they have a ton of free resources, and the podcast is on there as well. There's plenty of support groups that are available that are free. One of the best places to get free support group is to call your local hospice center. Many of those hospice centers, it doesn't matter if you've had someone die through hospice, they will still welcome you into their grief support group systems. Usually those grief support systems are about 6 to 8 weeks long. It's free mental support going through the grieving process. There's a great book by Megan Devine. She has It's Okay That You're Not Okay. And then she also has a workbook that just came out. I wish I could remember the name of it now, but I will send you all that. And then there's a podcast called Grief Out Loud podcast. Really amazing podcast as well. And in 2023, Coming soon, I will be launching a group program called Leading While Grieving. It will be an 8-week series. I'll tell you more about that along in the next time that we connect and in the emails to come. But I wanted to let you know that there's going to be additional support available for you through Masseria. So today, what did we talk about? We talked about what grief is and what loss is. We talked about the ways that grief kind of shows up for us in messy ways. And we also talked about tips for grief support during the holidays, as well as when you are a leader. So what I'm going to invite you to do as we start to wrap up our time together today is in the chat, if you will write, what was most meaningful for you? If you're joining the replay, pause here and write down in your journal, or just pause and think of like, what was most meaningful for you? If you could just take away one thing from today's session, what would that be? For many of you, that is talking about that you're not alone in your grief and that it looks pretty messy. A couple of people have mentioned the tips for the grief, especially practicing the small moments of self-care. So I'm curious for you. Email me or write in the chat. Send me your thoughts on what was most meaningful for you today in our time together, talking about leading while grieving. So if you want to know more about grief, loss, even the work that I do as a death doula, or even as a coach, or maybe you just want some resources to help support you, all you have to do is contact me at my email address that you see here. It's Alison, ALISON, at mymasseria, MISERIA.com. And you can also text me. That is my office number at 501-291-0481. You can just text me there and I will get your message. Thank you so much for being present here today. I just really want to acknowledge you for pausing, for being present for yourself, for being open and engaging in our conversation today. As you continue to process this information, if you have questions or want additional support, please reach out to me. If I'm not able to, I have amazing tools and resources and other connections of people who could support you as well. Even if you don't live in the area that I live in, I still have tools and resources and support that is available to you. After today, after we finish this call, what I'd like to invite you to do before you jump into the rest of your day is take another few moments of deep breaths, a glass of water, and just express gratitude for showing up for yourself today. Thank you so much. I look forward to hearing from you soon, and may you have an amazing day.